Interstellar Empire dared to invade Earth. Humanity annihilated them instantly. HFY Sci-Fi story. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to our main character. The first alarm wasn't a sound, just a faint tremor that rolled beneath Lieutenant Jonah Hale's boots as he adjusted the calibrators on the North Atlantic Orbital Defense Array. At first he thought it was just another glitch. The array was old, patched together with spare parts and budget cuts, and sometimes it shook when the thrusters fired. But then came the second tremor. Stronger, colder, like the entire sky had inhaled. Jonah looked up through the viewport, and for a heartbeat, everything felt wrong. The stars flickered, not like stars normally flickered. This was different, as if something massive had moved between them. Have you ever had that moment where your gut tells you something's off before your brain catches up? Jonah felt that. Press 1 if you've ever sensed danger before you even understood it. The holographic radar beside him snapped to life, lines of red filling the screen so fast it began to lag. What the hell? Jonah whispered. 47 unidentified objects had appeared above Earth's exosphere in less than a second. Then 1 became 2. 2 became 10. 10 became a formation, triangular, precise, unnatural. And then the system tagged them. THELRUN war-class dropships. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. You watching right now, would you panic? Freeze? Or start praying? Comment yes if you'd freak out just a little. Jonah didn't pray. He reached for the emergency comms, but a blast of static shivered through every channel, like a giant invisible hand had crushed the entire communication network in its fist. His pulse hammered. The air tasted metallic. Something outside screamed across the dark, a streak of burning blue. Then another. Then 50 more. They weren't shooting at anything. They were landing. Invading. And Earth's defense grid was quiet. Offline, blacked out. Jonah slammed his palm onto manual override. Blue lights surged across the panel as dormant systems woke. With a groan, like beasts dragged from sleep. One by one, turret arrays rotated toward the sky. His voice trembled as he whispered to nobody. They're really doing it. They actually dared. He opened a channel to Global Command. Nothing. Static. Cold. Dead. He switched to local frequencies. Still dead. Every screen around him flashed the same warning. Network overridden. External control detected. Jonah felt the chill run down his spine. Someone, or something, was hijacking Earth's defenses from the outside. Not happening, he muttered, grabbing the auxiliary keys beneath the panel. His hands shook as he twisted them into the override lock. The system hissed. Metal panels slid open. A red switch waited inside. A switch no alien virus could remote control. A switch that required a human hand. Protocol HFY authorized, the AI whispered. Lieutenant Jonah Hale, confirm. He hesitated just one heartbeat. Confirm. The orbital array roared to life. Turrets spun. Solar rails charged. The storm began. A blinding wall of plasma fire erupted from Earth's orbit straight into the descending alien formation. The first dropships disintegrated instantly, torn apart in a haze of molten metal and shattered hull. The sky lit up like a second sunrise, blue fire washing across the upper atmosphere. The invading fleet shifted, fracturing into panicked scatter formations. They hadn't expected resistance. They definitely hadn't expected this. Jonah exhaled shakily. That's right, he whispered. Welcome to Earth. The array shook violently as retaliatory fire streaked past, grazing the hull and sending sparks across his console. One shot hit close. So close he felt the heat through the floor. Okay, stay with me. He murmured to the trembling station, like he was calming down a scared animal. Have you ever tried to fix something while it was exploding around you? Press 1 if that's your kind of chaos. The lights flickered. A deep hum built beneath his boots. Then the radar blinked again. This time, one massive signature appeared, bigger than all the others combined. Slowly descending, slowly aiming at Earth. Jonah's breath caught. No. That's not a dropship. The system labeled it with a single word. Plaint breaker. And it was charging. Jonah swallowed, his heartbeat thundering like a war drum. If that thing fires, we're done. But he wasn't done. Not yet. And that's where everything changes. Lieutenant Jonah Hale steadied himself against the trembling console as the orbital array shuddered under another distant blast. The plate breaker's enormous. Energy signature continued its slow descent, casting a faint red glow across the radar hologram. If you were in his position right now, with a weapon the size of a small moon aiming at your home, what would you do? Comment yes, if you would still try to fight. Jonah wiped the sweat from his brow, his breath fogging the inside of his visor. He opened a secondary panel, exposing the manual coolant valves. The array was overheating from firing too many shots too quickly, and the system's automated safeguards had already shut down twice. He had one chance to keep it going. He twisted the valve with both hands until his wrists ached, forcing the coolant flow to spike. A violent hiss erupted, cold vapor blasting across his helmet. The lights flickered, but the rails stabilized. Come on, girl, he muttered to the massive machine, like he was talking to an old friend. Stay with me. Have you ever whispered encouragement to something that was falling apart, hoping it might hear you? The array's main cannon hummed, building charge again. Then the radar updated. The planet breaker had shifted its angle, locking directly onto North America. The estimated blast radius appeared in bright red, 2,000 miles. Jonah felt his stomach drop. No, no, no. Before he could react, a flicker of movement streaked across the viewport. A small alien scout craft, sleek and black, zipped so close to the station that Jonah saw the pilot's glowing eyes through the glass. The craft fired a plasma burst at the array. Sparks exploded overhead. Jonah stumbled as metal shrieked. Fire suppression systems hissed like snakes. The panel beside him burst apart, showering him with burning fragments. He hit the floor hard, his ears ringing. Diagnostics, he croaked. The AI sputtered with a broken metallic stutter. Warning. Hull breach on sublevel 3. Cooling system unstable. Manual repair required. Jonah dragged himself up. A deep metallic groan echoed through the station as gravity stabilizers flickered. If cooling failed, the rails would melt into slag. If the rails melted, Earth would have no orbital defense left. And the planet breaker was seconds away from firing. He forced himself to stand despite the pain radiating across his ribs. Okay, he whispered. Guess we are doing this the stupid way. He grabbed his emergency toolkit, slammed the hatch release, and stepped into the dim maintenance corridor. Red. Emergency lighting pulsed like a heartbeat. Dust floated in the air from the earlier hit. His boots clanged against the metal walkway as he moved deeper into the station's guts. You ever walked into a dark hallway knowing every instinct in your body was telling you to turn back? Press 1 if you have felt that fear in real life. The breach was worse than he expected. A 10-foot gash tore across the outer wall, sealed only by a flickering force field that wavered like a soap bubble. Cold air rushed past him, tugging at his suit. Sparks rained from exposed cables. Jonah knelt, pulling open a scorched access panel. The coolant pipe was ruptured, leaking thick blue liquid that hissed when it hit the hot metal flooring. If I do not fix this in 20 seconds, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. He clamped the pipe, twisted off the broken segment, and jammed in a replacement connector from his toolkit. His gloves were slippery with coolant. His breathing quickened. The force field sputtered again. For a moment, he saw the blackness of space through the thinning barrier. Then, as he locked the connector in place, a blinding light washed over the corridor. Jonah froze. Was that the planet breaker firing? No, it was coming from outside the breach. He stood, moving closer to the force field. A massive shadow loomed beyond the station. It was not the planet breaker. It was something smaller but still gigantic, shaped like a spearhead plated in silver armor. An enemy cruiser. And it was aiming directly at the array. Jonah felt the blood drain from his face. You have got to be kidding me. The cruiser's cannons glowed with deadly blue energy. Jonah lunged for the internal stabilizer switch. He slammed the lever down. The force field hardened at the exact moment a plasma blast slammed into the array's hull. The entire station pitched violently, throwing Jonah sideways. Metal groaned, alarms wailed, and lights blew out in showers of sparks. Jonah hit the floor, dazed, as the cruiser powered its cannons again for a second shot. Humanity had seconds, maybe less, and he was the only one standing in the way. You think he will make it? Tell me where you are watching from, and whether you believe Jonah can survive this, because what happens next will change everything. Lieutenant Jonah Hale struggled to push himself upright as the orbital array groaned under the weight of the enemy cruiser's second charge. The deck vibrated like the heartbeat of something enormous and dying, and dust drifted down from the overhead beams in lazy spirals, as if even gravity had started to lose faith. His vision blurred for a moment before snapping back into focus, and he tasted metal on his tongue. If you were here right now, with the walls shaking around you and a cruiser the size of a skyscraper aiming its cannons at your station, what would you do? Would you run, freeze, or fight? Comment fight if you think you would stand your ground the way Jonah did. He forced himself to his feet, gripping a support beam to stay steady. The internal displays flickered erratically, feeding him critical warnings in rapid succession. Power grid destabilized, atmospheric leakage detected, coolant pressure still critically low. The cruiser outside rotated into full firing position, its hull reflecting the sun in blinding flashes. Jonah felt the thump of his pulse in his ears. One more shot, and the array would not just fail. It would disintegrate. He braced himself and sprinted down the corridor toward the main junction node, boots slamming against metal. The station groaned again, and a violent jolt nearly threw him off balance as the first cannon blast skimmed the hull. The impact hurled sparks into the air, lighting up the dim corridor like a thunderstorm. Hold together. Come on. Hold, he muttered under his breath. Have you ever talked to a machine like it was a person because you needed it to stay alive with you? As he turned the corner, the ground beneath him lurched sharply. Jonah slammed into the wall so hard his helmet cracked the surface. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he ignored it and kept moving. He could hear the coolant pipes hissing somewhere above, the system fighting to stay online. The emergency lights flickered red, bathing everything in the color of danger. When he reached the main junction, Jonah ripped open the access panel. The circuitry inside was sparking violently, and a cable had burned through completely. Without it, the primary rails could not charge enough to fire at the cruiser. He grabbed a replacement cable from his toolkit, hands trembling as he slid it into the coupler. Electricity bit at his fingertips even through the gloves, but he locked it in and twisted until it clicked. The station hummed. The rails began to vibrate, spinning up energy. Jonah exhaled shakily. Then another warning tone blared. The radar flashed, plate breaker beam preparing to fire. Jonah's breath froze in his throat. The massive weapon hanging above Earth was glowing hotter now, gathering impossible amounts of energy. The cruiser was not trying to stop the array because of revenge. It was trying to stop Jonah from interrupting the plate breaker's final shot. Not happening, Jonah whispered, adrenaline flooding through him. Not while I breathe. He pulled the emergency lever beside the junction panel. A blast shield slammed over the primary console, reactivating the manual targeting system. The holographic screen flickered to life with a single pulsing option, fire all rails. Jonah slapped the control. The entire station shook as every rail across the orbital ring aligned and charged. Blue arcs crawled across the metal skin of the array like lightning searching for the ground. You can imagine the sound, a low roar, building into a bone-shaking howl. The cruiser outside detected the buildup. Its cannons flared, aiming for a kill shot. Come on, Jonah whispered through clenched teeth. Just one more second. The array screamed. The cruiser fired. A blast of blinding plasma tore toward the station. Jonah threw himself against the console. The rails fired at the exact same moment. A colossal bolt of blue-white energy ripped through the void, slamming directly into the cruiser's underbelly. The alien ship cracked open like glass under a hammer, its reactor blooming into a silent explosion of violet light. The shockwave hammered the array, nearly throwing Jonah off his feet. Flames burst from a dozen panels. The lights died completely, plunging everything into darkness. Jonah panted in the black, the only sound his own breathing. Did it work? He whispered. The backup generator kicked in with a weak hum. The radar flickered back. The plate breaker's charging sequence had slowed. Barely. It was still preparing to fire. Jonah closed his eyes. The cruiser was gone, but the real threat had only just begun. Humanity had seconds before the sky itself would split open. And Jonah knew exactly what he had to do next, even if it meant he would not come back. You feel that? That weight in your chest? Comment which city you are. watching from while we continue, because what Jonah attempts now is something no human has ever tried before. Lieutenant Jonah Hale braced himself against the scorched bulkhead, his heartbeat pounding like a fist against the inside of his chest as the orbital array's dim emergency lights flickered back to life. The planet breaker still hovered in high orbit like a glowing wound in the sky, its massive energy core pulsing brighter with every passing second. You watching right now? Tell me honestly, would you stay and fight knowing something that size is aiming straight at your home? Comment yes if you think you would keep going. Jonah swallowed hard and checked the diagnostic display on the cracked visor of his helmet. The station was dying. Hull integrity below 30%. Power grid unstable. Rail systems barely functional. And yet, the plane breaker's charging sequence had only slowed, not stopped. Earth had bought seconds. Maybe a minute. Nothing more. Jonah grabbed the handrail and began moving toward the command nexus, limping from the earlier impact. His ribs burned with every breath, and a warm trickle of blood slid down the inside of his suit from a cut on his forehead, but he pushed through it. The corridor was filled with drifting ash and sparks, and every footstep echoed like he was walking through the inside of a collapsing cathedral. Halfway down the passageway, the station lurched sharply. Jonah slammed against the wall, catching himself just before he fell. A fresh explosion echoed from the lower decks. He checked the sensor screen. More enemy ships were approaching. Smaller ones. Fast ones. You ever have that moment where you stop and think, how much worse can this get? Because Jonah felt that too. The readings showed a squadron of Thalran interceptors heading straight toward him. Not toward the station. Toward him. They had triangulated the manual firing signature. They knew exactly where the human who had just crippled their cruiser was standing. Jonah clenched his jaw. So that is how it is, he muttered. You want me? Fine. He opened the emergency locker and pulled out the reinforced suit plating, slapping it onto his arms and chest. The magnetic seals clicked into place with sharp metallic clacks that sounded like a soldier chambering around. He grabbed the portable stabilizer beacon, a cylindrical device about the size of a thermos. If he could plant it near the array's final junction, he might keep the system stable long enough to fire one last volley. One shot. The shot that mattered. The floor rumbled again. Jonah pushed forward, dragging himself along the tilted corridor toward the central platform. When he reached it, he saw the massive panoramic viewport ahead, cracked but still holding. Outside, the planet breaker loomed larger now, its energy core blazing like a second sun. Around it, the approaching interceptors flew in tight V formations, leaving streaks of neon light in their wake. Jonah planted the stabilizer beacon beside the main console. The device whirred to life, extending its metallic prongs and anchoring itself to the floor. Blue lines of stabilizing energy spread through the deck like veins. The rails began charging again, slowly but steadily. Come on, Jonah whispered. Just a little more. Suddenly, the station shook violently as the first interceptor fired, sending a plasma bolt ripping across the hull. The impact shattered the viewport's outer layer, spiderwebbing cracks across the glass. Jonah shielded his face with his arm as debris flew past. An alarm blared overhead. Force field failure imminent. Have you ever felt the air around you change, like the room itself knew something terrible was coming? Jonah felt that. The next interceptor streaked directly toward the viewport. Jonah dove behind a support column just as the force field flickered. A blinding blast hit the glass. For a moment, everything went white. When his vision returned, the viewport was gone. A gaping hole now lay open to space, sealed only by a flickering, half-formed barrier. Through it, he could see the planet breaker in perfect clarity, glowing, churning, hungry to fire. The vacuum tugged at him, pulling his suit, ripping smaller debris into the void. Jonah fought to stay grounded by hooking his arm around the column. Not yet, he growled. You are not taking me yet. The stabilizer beacon beeped rapidly. The rails were nearly charged. Jonah forced himself upright and grabbed the manual trigger lever beside the console. The station trembled again as two more interceptors closed in, their cannons charging. Jonah pulled the lever. The rails screamed, powering up to full discharge, blue lightning arcing across the station as if the entire structure had become a single enormous weapon. But before the station fired, Jonah saw it. A new signature on the radar. Something breaking formation. Something massive, the planet breaker, was moving, and its weapon was about to fire. Jonah's eyes widened. Earth was seconds away from annihilation. If you are still watching, tell me where you are from, because what Jonah has to do next will decide whether any of us survive. Lieutenant Jonah Hale felt the orbital array tilt beneath him as the planet breaker shifted position, its colossal form rotating until the weapon's core aimed directly at Earth like the barrel of a cosmic cannon. The stabilizer beacon continued to pulse at his feet, its blue veins crawling across the floor in frantic attempts to hold the failing power grid together. You watching right now? What would be going through your mind if you saw the weapon that could erase your entire world charging right in front of you? Comment. I would stand, if you believe you would keep fighting the way Jonah did. Jonah gripped the manual firing lever just as the first interceptor banked toward the breach, its engines shrieking like a predator closing in on prey. The force field flickered again, tearing open for a split second. Cold vacuum slammed into Jonah's suit, pulling at him with monstrous force. He flattened himself against the support column as debris whirled past him into the void. The interceptor fired first. A streak of orange plasma roared toward him. Jonah threw himself to the left, landing hard on his shoulder as the beam tore through the console he had been using seconds earlier. Metal exploded in a fountain of sparks. The blast shield split apart, sending molten fragments skittering across the deck. Jonah's visor display flickered with red warnings. Atmospheric pressure critical, hull fracture expanding, stabilizer grid destabilizing. He forced himself to his feet just as the second interceptor streaked toward the breach. It flew so close that Jonah could see the pilot's cold, pupil-less eyes staring at him through the ship's tinted canopy. The pilot tilted its head, almost curious, as if surprised the human was still alive. Jonah clenched his teeth. Too bad for you, he growled. He sprinted toward the exposed console near the viewport's remains. The force field sputtered again, but this time the barrier held just long enough for him to reach the panel. He grabbed the emergency rail alignment wheel and spun it with every ounce of strength he had left. The array groaned in response, metal grinding against metal as the rails shifted position toward their final firing angle. Then the wheel jammed. It locked in place with a harsh metallic clank, refusing to budge. Jonah pulled again. Nothing. You ever feel that sinking moment when you realize the tiny thing you need to work is the thing that gives out? Jonah felt that exact drop in his stomach. The planebreaker's core flared suddenly, bathing the entire corridor in blinding white light. Energy rippled outward like shockwaves across the upper atmosphere. Earth's last seconds were ticking away. Jonah took one step back from the wheel, breathing hard, sweat dripping into his eyes. If you will not turn, he whispered, I will make you. He braced his boots, wrapped both hands around the metal spokes, and pulled with everything he had. His muscles screamed. His ribs felt like they were splitting apart. The wheel shuddered, resisting him. He roared and pulled harder. The metal groaned in pain. Then finally, with a brutal screech, the wheel shifted. Just a few inches. But enough. The rails locked into their final position. The stabilizer beacon beeped frantically as the array began absorbing more power than it was ever designed to handle. Blue lightning crawled across the floor again, this time erratic and wild, as if the machine was trying desperately not to tear itself apart. Jonah slammed the manual firing lever. The rails surged. Energy built so fast the deck vibrated under his feet. The lights flickered, dimmed, then burst back to full brightness. Jonah grabbed the railing as a hum rose beneath him, growing louder, deeper, almost alive. Outside, the interceptors realized too late what was happening. They banked away in panic. The planet breaker adjusted its aim. Its core flared to maximum. The beam was moments from firing. Jonah whispered under his breath, "Come on, fire." The array screamed like a dying star. And just as the planet breaker unleashed its final charge, Jonah saw something move in the corner of the radar. Something massive. Something that was not supposed to be there. A new signature. Unknown. Approaching fast. Have you ever seen hope appear at the last possible second? Tell me where you are watching from, because what Jonah sees next will change everything about this war. Lieutenant Jonah Hale's heart slammed against his ribs as the radar blip grew larger, brighter, and impossibly fast. The unknown signature streaked toward the planet breaker like a spear of pure light cutting across the darkness. For a split second, Jonah wondered if the array's damaged sensors were malfunctioning. But then the station itself shook as the approaching object tore through the debris field outside. The force of its arrival rattled every bolt in the failing structure. You watching this, what would you think if something you had never seen before appeared in the middle of a battle for Earth's survival? Would you assume it was friend or enemy? Comment friend or enemy below because Jonah had no idea what was coming. The new vessel burst from a cloud of shattered metal, revealing its shape in the glow of the plankbreaker's raging core. It was enormous, but not in the brutal, industrial way Thalrune ships were built. This one had smooth, curved plating that shimmered like living silver. Its engines glowed a deep blue that looked nothing like alien plasma. Jonah blinked, stunned. He whispered, "What are you?" As if answering him, the vessel released a shockwave of concentrated energy that blew apart 3 Thalrune interceptors in a single pulse. The remaining enemy ships scrambled in panic, breaking formation. The planet breaker hesitated, its aim shifting, its massive weapon core momentarily dimming, as if the arrival had disrupted its fire sequence. Jonah felt a spark of something he had not let himself feel since the attack began. Hope. But it came with a heavy dose of fear. If this new ship could destroy interceptors that easily, then whatever it was could just as easily destroy Earth. The array's rails continued to surge beneath his boots, the stabilizer beacon glowing hotter than ever as it fought to hold the system together. Jonah gripped the railing and stared at the mysterious ship. "If you are here to help," he muttered, "now would be a really good time." The silver vessel rotated, its hull shifting like layered glass. Then a beam of blue-white energy lanced out, piercing through the plankbreaker's outer armor. It was not enough to destroy the weapon, but it was enough to interrupt the firing sequence. The planet breaker trembled, its core dimming for a heartbeat. Jonah felt the rumble through the deck. The opportunity was seconds long, at most, and he had to take it. Jonah slammed his hand onto the manual firing lever. The array screamed as it tore itself toward the edge of destruction. The rails glowed, white-hot, arcs of electricity whipping across the ceiling in violent branches. Then the entire station jolted violently as a new blast hit the hull. Jonah stumbled. One of the remaining interceptors had broken through and was barreling straight toward the breach, intent on crashing itself into the array. Jonah lunged for the secondary console, fighting the pull of the vacuum as the force field flickered once again. He slammed his palm onto the last emergency control. Override. Seal breach. The station hesitated, sparks flying from the ceiling as if unsure it could obey. Then the barrier flared back to full strength just as the interceptor hit. The ship smashed into the force field, exploding in a plume of violet fire. The shockwave threw Jonah backward across the deck. He hit the floor hard enough to knock the air out of his lungs. His visor display filled with red warnings. The rails were overheating. The stabilizer was seconds from failing. The array could blow apart before firing, and the planet breaker was restarting its firing sequence. Jonah gasped for breath, forcing himself to rise to one knee. The mysterious ship outside fired again, sending another beam into the plankbreaker's armor, carving a molten trench across its surface. The planet breaker retaliated with a broadside that nearly engulfed the newcomer in a wash of burning plasma. The silver vessel spun out of the blast, trailing sparks but still fighting. Jonah braced himself against the console and roared, "Fire!" The rails discharged. A beam of pure blue energy erupted from the array, slicing through space directly toward the planet breaker. The screens flared white. The deck trembled. Jonah covered his face as the blast lit the entire station like a sunrise. And just as the beam hit its target, the mysterious vessel dove in close, amplifying the shot with a surge of its own energy. The planet breaker convulsed. Its core pulsed wildly. Then it began to crack. Jonah's breath caught. Please, let this be it. But as the plankbreaker's armor split apart, he saw something move inside the rupture. Something alive. Something massive. The planet breaker had a pilot. Or worse, the commander. And it was not done. You watching right now? Tell me which country you are from as we continue, because what Jonah is about to face next is beyond anything he has seen so far. Lieutenant Jonah Hale watched in stunned silence as the ruptured armor of the planet breaker peeled back like molten steel being pried apart by invisible hands. Inside the glowing breach, a silhouette moved, enormous and slow, framed by the violent pulses of the destabilizing core. The radar flashed warnings faster than Jonah could process, but his mind was fixed on that shape, that impossible figure rising from the heart of a superweapon. You watching this right now? What would you even think if you saw something alive inside a machine built to destroy planets? Would you freeze, or would you force yourself to keep going? Comment, keep going, if you know you would push forward. The figure stepped deeper into the light, and Jonah's breath hitched. It was not a creature. It was a pilot chamber, and inside it floated a Thalrune warlord larger than any alien Jonah had ever seen in training files or briefings. Its skin shimmered like obsidian glass, and its many eyes glowed with electric gold fury. Tubes and conduits fed into its body like veins plugged into the weapon itself. It was not piloting the planet breaker. It was fused with it. Jonah whispered, "That is their commander." As if hearing him, the warlord turned, locking all 6 of its eyes onto the orbital array. The energy around it surged, and the planet breaker's core flared bright again. Even damaged, even cracking, it was forcing itself to fire one last catastrophic shot. Jonah stumbled back from the viewport's shattered edge. The stabilizer beacon shrieked warnings, lights flickering uncontrollably as the station neared catastrophic overload. The rails had burned half their length. The deck beneath him radiated heat like the inside of a furnace. Earth glowed on the horizon, a fragile blue sphere waiting to be erased. Jonah did not have time. He did not have options, and he barely had strength left. But he had one thing the warlord did not. He had humanity's favorite weapon: stubbornness. Jonah limped toward the auxiliary firing controls, the last place in the station that still had partial power. His entire body ached, and his vision blurred with every step. Sparks dripped from the ceiling like fiery rain. The mysterious silver vessel outside continued to fire at the planet breaker, but the warlord deflected the beams with pulses of raw energy from its own body. The newcomer was strong, but not strong enough alone. "Come on," Jonah whispered to the array. "We are not done yet. Have you ever talked to yourself just to keep your courage from falling apart?" Jonah's voice trembled, but determination hardened it. He reached the auxiliary console and grabbed the manual override wheel. It was meant for emergency redirection, not full power discharge, but it was all he had left. He gritted his teeth, twisting it toward maximum yield. The array screamed. The rails surged again, flickering violently as blue light crawled up their lengths like unstable lightning. The stabilizer beacon flared white-hot. The entire station began to tilt, rotating toward the planet breaker's exposed core. Jonah slammed the activation switch. But nothing happened. The system was locked. Too damaged. Too unstable. The warlord inside the planet breaker raised one massive arm, gathering its energy for the final strike. Jonah stared at the cracked firing lever beside him. It was fused in place, its housing bent from the earlier blast. If he wanted it to move, he would have to force it manually. He swallowed hard. "Then I guess we do this old school." He braced one foot, wrapped both hands around the lever, and pulled with every ounce of remaining strength. The metal resisted. His muscles burned. His ribs screamed. His glove slipped once, twice. He roared and pulled again. The lever shifted a fraction of an inch. Then another. The station shook violently as the planet breaker's charging sequence peaked, white light flooding the entire viewport. Jonah's arms shook violently. He felt something in his shoulder tear. But he pulled anyway. The lever snapped down. The rails overloaded instantly. A beam of pure white-blue energy erupted from the array, brighter than anything Jonah had fired before. It collided with the planet breaker's exposed core at the exact moment the mysterious vessel added its own final surge. The combined blast tore through the warlord's chamber, ripping the creature's energy field apart. The planet breaker convulsed. Its core destabilized. Then everything went silent. No alarms. No rumbling. No roaring. Just a quiet that felt impossibly heavy. Jonah gasped, chest heaving, staring through the trembling station at the planet breaker as cracks spread across its superstructure like fractures in glass. And then, it began to collapse. You watching right now? Tell me your city or country, because what happens to Jonah next is something no training, no mission, no soldier could ever be prepared for. Lieutenant Jonah Hale stared through the fractured viewport as the planet breaker split open along its glowing seams, each crack widening like the shell of a dying star. The massive weapon, once the terror of Earth's sky, now trembled as its internal structure failed. Panels the size of city blocks peeled off and drifted away, spinning like falling leaves in zero gravity. The warlord inside convulsed, its enormous body flickering with arcs of unstable energy. The creature let out a silent scream that Jonah could feel more than hear, a pulse of raw fury and disbelief rippling through space. You watching right now? What would you do if the monster that tried to destroy your planet was finally collapsing in front of you? Would you feel relief, fear, or something in between? Comment your reaction because Jonah did not even know how to breathe in that moment. The mysterious silver vessel held position near the ruptured planet breaker, its hull glowing faintly from the energy it had just expelled. Jonah could see the scorch marks across its surface. Whoever piloted that ship had taken damage to protect Earth. The thought hit Jonah with a strange warmth. They were not alone. But the moment of fragile hope shattered as the planet breaker's core began to destabilize faster than Jonah had expected. What had seemed like cracks were now tearing open violently, each one vomiting bursts of white-hot plasma. The radar blared a new warning across Jonah's visor. Core detonation imminent. Estimated blast radius, 1,000 miles. Jonah's heart stopped. 1,000 miles. If the planet breaker detonated this close to Earth, even damaged, it would scorch half the atmosphere and send fragments the size of mountains crashing into the planet at orbital speeds. Humanity would survive, but millions would not. Jonah whispered, "No. Please no." The mysterious vessel must have reached the same conclusion because it suddenly dipped toward the planet breaker, angling itself as if preparing to dive into the ruptured core. Jonah blinked. That made no sense. No pilot, no ship, no armor could survive a core detonation. Even approaching it was suicide. "What are you doing?" Jonah whispered, gripping the rail as if the ship could somehow hear him. The silver vessel released a coded pulse of blue-white light. Jonah did not understand the alien symbols that flickered across his visor, but he understood the tone. It was a farewell message. A sacrifice. Jonah slammed his hand against the console. "No, do not do it. Do not." But the vessel was already accelerating. It streaked toward the planet breaker, engines flaring brighter than ever, carving a trail of silver across space. The warlord inside the dying weapon reached out in rage, tendrils of energy whipping through the cracks, as if trying to grab the intruder. But the silver ship dodged between the arcs with impossible grace. It collided with the core chamber in a blast of blue and white, its entire hull dissolving into pure energy. The reaction was immediate. The planet breaker's core surged, as if swallowing the sacrifice whole. The cracks across its surface froze. The runaway instability slowed. The core dimmed. The detonation halted. Jonah exhaled a shaking breath that he had not realized he was holding. The mysterious vessel had not destroyed the core. It had absorbed it, or neutralized it, or given something of itself to contain the explosion. Jonah did not know how. He only knew the truth. Someone out there had sacrificed everything to keep Earth alive. But the victory was short-lived. The planet breaker, though no longer primed to explode, was still falling apart. Its remains were collapsing inward, folding like a dying star collapsing under its own weight. And the gravitational pull of that collapse was dragging everything nearby with it. The orbital array lurched as the collapse field intensified. Jonah stumbled, catching himself on the console as alarms screamed around him. The lights flickered wildly. The deck shook so hard he nearly fell to his knees. The radar displayed a new warning. Collapse, singularity forming. Jonah's blood ran cold. If the planet breaker collapsed into a micro-singularity, the orbital array would be pulled in. And Jonah with it. The entire station tilted again as debris outside was drawn toward the imploding superweapon. Even the remains of the interceptors spiraled inward like scraps caught in a whirlpool. Jonah looked at the failing array, the sparking consoles, the dying systems. He knew the truth. If he stayed, he would not survive. But if he abandoned the array, Earth might lose its only defense system for whatever came next. What would you do in that moment? Stay and die, or run and live to fight again? Comment your choice, because Jonah had seconds to decide, and either path would change everything. Lieutenant Jonah Hale felt the orbital array twist under his feet as the gravitational pull of the collapsing planet breaker intensified, dragging metal, debris, and entire ship fragments into its forming singularity. Warning alarms screamed in his helmet, each one flashing red across his visor as the array's stabilizers failed one by one. You watching right now, imagine being in Jonah's boots. Imagine the metal groaning around you, the lights flickering, the sky outside folding inward like a dying star. Would you stay to protect others, or run to survive? Comment stay, or run, because Jonah had no more time left to think. Panels tore free from the walls and shot toward the viewport, vanishing into the swirling collapse. The station shook so violently that Jonah had to grip the railing until his knuckles turned white inside his gloves. Smoke curled through the corridor, and chunks of ceiling clanged onto the deck, each tremor threatening to rip the array apart. The radar blared again, collapse singularity strength increasing. Jonah stared at the flashing warnings. He had seconds, maybe less. His breath came in sharp gasps. The air tasted of burned circuitry and metal. He looked at the escape pod bay on the lower deck. It was damaged, hanging at an angle from earlier blasts, but one pod still showed a faint green light. Active, undamaged. His only way out. Jonah hesitated, leaving Mint abandoning the array, the system that had held back the attack. But staying Mint allowing the singularity to swallow him whole. Have you ever stood at a crossroads where both choices felt wrong? Jonah forced himself to move, stumbling as the gravitational pull increased. He grabbed the railing and pulled himself step by step toward the pod bay. The lights flickered so hard they nearly went black. A loose beam slammed into the floor beside him, sparks exploding in every direction. Jonah flinched but kept going. Come on, he whispered, though he did not know if he was talking to himself or the station. Do not give up on me now. He reached the pod bay just as the array lurched violently, tilting the deck by almost 20 degrees. Jonah nearly slipped but caught himself on a dangling cable. He pushed through the smoke, reached the remaining pod, and slapped the hatch release. The pod door hissed open. Inside, the cramped chamber hummed softly, its emergency systems still intact. Jonah looked back at the array one last time. The stabilizer beacon on the main deck flickered weakly, its blue veins dimming with every second. The rails that had fired humanity's only chance were now melting under their own weight. The entire station trembled like something breathing its last. Jonah whispered, "Thank you," as if the machine had been a partner, not a tool. Then he climbed into the pod, strapped himself in, and slammed the hatch shut. The pod systems engaged immediately, scanning for safe exit vectors. But there were none. The singularity was consuming everything. Jonah felt a cold rush of fear. Overeyed, he gasped. Manual launch authorization, Lieutenant Jonah Hale. The pod's AI responded with a soft chime. Override accepted. Launching. The clamps released. The pod shot away from the array with a violent jolt. Jonah was thrown back into his seat as the tiny capsule accelerated, shaking so hard he feared it would tear apart. Through the small rear viewport, he watched the orbital array stretch like a shadow being pulled toward oblivion. The entire structure elongated, twisted, and then vanished into the singularity with a silent flash. Jonah felt something sink inside him, a weight of grief for the machine that had held the line when no one else could. Outside the pod, debris spiraled into the collapse like falling snow. The singularity pulsed once, twice. Then, with a blinding flash, it imploded. Light rippled across the void, washing everything in a wave of silver-blue brilliance. The pull vanished instantly. Jonah's pod tumbled through the fading shockwave, spinning wildly before the stabilizers re-engaged. Suddenly, silence returned. Calm. Space stretched out before him, cold and endless. The remains of the battle drifted silently, glittering like broken stars. Jonah exhaled shakily. He had survived. Earth had survived. But as he looked toward the horizon, he saw something that made his breath freeze. A faint pulse of blue light. The same signature as the mysterious vessel that had sacrificed itself. It flickered once, twice, like a heartbeat. Jonah leaned forward, eyes wide. Are you still out there? The light pulsed again, faint but alive. Have you ever felt hope bloom in your chest when you thought everything was over? Tell me where you are watching from, because Jonah's war was not the end. It was the beginning of a story the universe had not seen yet.